All right, I'm back. So initially, I had written this script a while ago, and but for some reason the pages were lost for some stupid nonsense. Um, so that was annoying, and obviously that wasted a lot of my energy I had between work, cleaning the house, and putting our dog down. The usual stuff, I guess. Anyways, the focus isn't so much about COVID, but economics in general. And I think despite having it initially deleted, it encapsulates a good amount of what's happening in the world currently. I do point fingers at the far right, obviously, though, as I've said on my channel, if you've been paying attention, the Democrats have greenlit over time what the right is doing. War isn't just being orchestrated by Republicans, even as Biden bombs Syria 75 times as the Assad government falls. So, this could be like destroying Modar Gaddafi. Eventually, his regime collapsed and slavery in the area was brought back. Now, this isn't because the US brought back slavery, but we think by toppling a dictator that things are going to become better, and obviously they don't. So, anyways, COVID-19, the Great Reset, isn't just about one thing, it's an issue that intersects with everything in life, from geopolitics, trade networks, supply lines, the working class, and national security. The theme is everything being interconnected in what is called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, written by Klaus Schwab. COVID-19, The Great Reset, was written by associates at the World Economic Forum, Malaret, data analyst, and Klaus Schwab, the chairman of the forum. The magnitude of digital connection is seen from a physics standpoint as superposition or quantum politics. The forum, like others, acts as NGOs, non-government organizations. On their on their website says bringing governments, business, civil society together, working behind the policy level. The issues in the world scale are stacking onto each other. The balance is becoming precarious, and COVID merely put things into perspective, more into focus for society to deal with its unraveling. The reset was initially called the Global Redesign Initiative, which was a 600-page document written in the aftermath of the 2008 2009 recession. This ties into the concept written by the World Economic Forum chairman, uh, stakeholder capitalism, written in a meeting in Davos, Switzerland, hosted by the mega wealthy companies. Yeah, hosted by mega wealthy companies connected to oil, food, health, and technology, intersecting privately. Industries like BP, Coca Cola, Minecraft, Nestle, Amazon, and Pfizer associate of environmental consulting and center of governance and sustainability. Harris Gleckman describes this as, quote, the most comprehensive proposal for redesigning since the formulation of the United Nations during World War II. Gleckman claims these stakeholders have no concern for overall accountability. That being said, crisis after crisis only pushes their excuse to direct their agendas, including issues like 9/11, low birth rate in developing countries, developed countries, though this is happening worldwide in general, and COVID-19. The book explains that in general, viruses have usually been the reset to society, while people look for scapegoats. The Jews in the Middle Ages blamed for the poisoned wells, and China blamed for COVID, while the Pentagon does anti vaccine strategies to block them. 98% of antibiotics, I believe, come from China. So this is an issue for national security in some respects. Okay, so under these circumstances, the authors acknowledge the rivalry between the US and China as, quote, a new type of Cold War, end quote, which I'll go into later. In terms of a reset, the book points to empires changing from plagues like Byzantine from the Justinian, Aztecs from European bacteria, to the Black Death known as the unrecognized beginning of modern man. The world was already changing, but COVID thrown in the mix apparently has policymakers seeing these changing times as an official checkpoint in history. BC, before coronavirus, and AC, after coronavirus. Obviously, a little hyperbole. So it still makes sense as a health precaution before people in power had any idea of how biological threats passed around. Uh, Quarantine stood initially for 40 days for religious symbolism revolved around purity, Lent, and the Great Flood in the Bible. Of course, once plagues and sickness weren't reduced to foul air and mystical explanations, it was common eventually to think about it from a public health versus economic recovery argument, as historian Simon Shima explains this dramatic situation. During the quarantine, the same process took place in earlier centuries. Workers, merchants, any trade at all withered away despite rising against political elite opinion. Though the necessary evil was installed for better or worse, quote, must the economy die so that it could be resurrected in robust good health? Yes, said the guardians of public health, who became part of urban life in Europe from the 15th century onward. During the beginning of COVID 19, whatever real or imagined corruption that was seen by citizens, initially US data suggests there was less spending and working before lockdowns were ever imposed, meaning citizens chose health over economic potential. Unfortunately, this won't stop the quote saving lives versus saving economy debate. The mixed debates about authoritarianism with anti vaxxers is seen online and in my anecdotal experience, noting that vaccines historically take up to 10 years. But the book, COVID 19 The Great Reset, also points that Ebola vaccine took 5 years to make, implying as automation and AI progress only closes the gap of time to make a vaccine. Others making connections to Nazis by mandating vaccines is actually antithetical to the United States Carl Brandt court case, now known as the Nuremberg Code, laying out 10 ethical points. And with that said, medical emergencies do not count as unwarranted medical experimentation. COVID 19, the Great Reset, uses the concept of black swan event, meaning totally unexpected and random, rare in some way, while white swan event is something considered due to happen or not rare in some scope of history in general. In the case of COVID 19, health officials, environmental groups, biologists, etc., saw this coming through our own negligence of the planet. The author of Spillover, David Quammen, puts this into perspective. Quote, we invade tropical forests and other wild landscapes which harbor so many species of animal and plants, and within those creatures, so many unknown viruses. We disrupt ecosystems. When that happens, they need a new host. Often, we are it. Using a planet to the edge of ruin got us to this point for these sanctions over our lives to make sense. These heavily justified points, like health over economic development and vaccines being rightfully pushed against Nazi fear mongering, should not blind us to corruption. Facts are used as a euphemism for bigotry, but in this case, the health guidelines are a veil to exploit the citizens. The book talks about how the crisis will be made good use or, quote, not letting it go to waste by the world leaders to deal with climate change. Apparently, an Obama era quote, but lockdowns on the citizens didn't impact carbon emissions. If you thought this was a plan to control people for population control, the book argues that industry is doing the most polluting, despite all the talk on citizens' carbon footprint impacting the world. These are not the same justifications, and the authors aren't advocating for population control. Contact tracing is said to lead to worries of tracking and monitoring beyond health reasons. Just like 9/11 losing liberty for security, health will transfer to more surveillance techniques, which in the book states the balance of society requires trust between citizens, governments, state, business, etc. Attempting to keep politicians accountable won't be easy. All right. So thank you guys if you've been listening so far for sticking through with this. I should have probably kept my tablet on like 30 minutes or so when it came to the backlight. All right. Like and subscribe actually if you've gone this far. I might actually put my Cash App on here. You know, just trying that out. Shameless, but if you've been coming along this far listening, anyways, no harm done. Anyways, blood pressure issues might be seen with suspicion outside of a health sense, interpreted as an angry call to action, and leaving employers with no incentive to drop the health monitoring. Quote, particularly if one of the indirect benefits of surveillance is to check on employees' productivity, leading to the section of the book, quote, the risk of dystopia, where today's existential crises are more like literature from The Handmaid's Tale, Shoshana Zuboff's Surveillance Capitalism, and 1984, though 1984, both sides of the political aisle use it as subjective examples of the opposition. As I mentioned earlier with China versus America, in a new type of civil war. It's not to say tensions weren't always there, but the issues were further exacerbated by the COVID crisis. And just like the moon landing as the dominant stunt to the world stage, the COVID crisis was getting to the moon, and planting the flag of the vaccine was the finish line. The America as a winner slash China as a winner section points out America has a stronger army. Of course, it's meaningless against an invisible enemy, and the US dominates anyways with the means of resource allocation with the dollar that everyone cooperates with, fleshing out the algorithm behind the scenes. The last example for China winning over America is COVID-19 crisis exposing the flaws in America, such as no basic universal health care at all, and systemic racism being reminded from Black Lives Matter after the death of George Floyd, showing we can't handle a tragedy and harder to come together. Every issue in America, like 9/11, ramped up social tension, like Islamophobia and privacy out the window with the Patriot Act, and other things like Pearl Harbor ending in mass imprisonment for anyone who looked Japanese, etc. For minorities in America, progress, the book reminds us, is not to be taken for granted. That most of African American history was slavery, segregation, continued eugenics, and convenient medical apartheid. The legacy of destruction on the black body is said to be the reason for premature babies in African American communities. The protest after the death of George Floyd wasn't random or out of turn. Before COVID, the last 6 years experienced 100 police custody fatalities. So Floyd being kneeled on was the final straw, on top of African American mortality rate being 2.4 times higher than white Americans during COVID. The New York Times quoted a college student, quote, young people have a deep desire for radical change because we see the broken path ahead. Youth activism increasing because of social media, the book claims, though it's implied as well these tensions have always been there, but COVID sparked a drive for a short moment. I would argue also that social media also encouraged radical far right movements as well. So it could be like a prefabricated war in some way, even if these things have always been there. Anyways, the Great Reset is not just about COVID, the economy, war, foreign rivals, etc., but the author goes on to say Black Lives Matter, climate activists, and the LGBT community directing change could be where the Great Reset lies. Or, as we have seen, more hands to point the finger. The book is positive the internet could revolutionize youth activism, though radio and TV were absorbed by commercial culture for propaganda, a tool used for division. There's no reason it will be any different. Uh, the elites and politicians in power have made it very clear how they feel about women and children. As it's become clear, automation is causing demographic schemes to be obsolete, which if you've seen my videos on how all politics became reproductive politics, the working class is included in how reproductive politics is framed, because obviously you need people to have proper families and reproductive freedom, or at least reproductive options, for there to be a working class. Anyways, this is causing no incentive for families. A 2016 Oxford study came to the conclusion that, quote, up to 86% of jobs in restaurants, 75% in retail, and 59% jobs in entertainment could be automated by 2035. President Trump, in his first term, promised at home paternity/maternity leave for people with children, but for federal workers, thus failing his word. At the same time, Trump's vice president, J.D. Vance, says he wants to tax childless people, with Democrats since Clinton, going right wing, once said keep abortion rare, as a red carpet for something more extreme, the eventual fall of Roe in 2022. The book easily exposes that automation rollout is not compatible with demographic and population based economies, for better or worse, especially when it comes to bringing the fourth industrial revolution to the developing world with lots of children. Quote, this is when employers replace less skilled workers with automation to increase labor productivity. Low income workers in routine jobs, manufacturing, food service, and transportation. In emerging and developing countries, particularly those with a youth bulge, technology runs the risk uh, of transforming the demographic dividend into a demographic nightmare. In the developing world, the writing on the wall, in the developed world, I don't know if I said that, sorry. The writing on the wall for elites is rising activism, stalling economies, and birth decline, aging nations. So outsourcing was the original weapon against the people, along with pension reform to balance out the lack of children, grinding the elderly into the economy, where the pride to work is all they know, versus youth activism fighting a structure of older generation. Fighting a structure the older generation never grew up in. Using the elderly for as long as automation and AI could be developed on the backs of generational warfare. The authors bring up growing nationalism and right wing extremism growing globally on the rise. Specifically, in this case, the rise of Donald Trump, partially caused by the lack of confidence in institutions like fake news, the paranoia around globalism, the lack of trust in the pharmaceutical industry. As co author Angus Deaton wrote in Death of Despair and the Future of Capitalism, quote, drug makers and hospitals will be even more powerful and wealthier than ever, end quote, while hospitals, nurses, doctors could be overrun with patients and burnout. And it's no surprise that with this assassination of the CEO, that the right and the left came together, and like millionaires like Ben Shapiro were chewed out by their audience, that this isn't a right or a left issue. It's everybody's families being killed by the negligence of the pharmaceutical industry, even if we are in most agreement that we're not willing to toss out the baby with the bathwater. Okay. Um, the rise of Trump came from the lack of confidence in the algorithm, and of course, the Electoral College outweighing the popular vote in 2016. Stands to reason why he would win the popular vote in 2024 as a mere plus. The concept for Trump's strange rise to power, summed up by the globalization trilemma coined by Danny Roderick. It goes on to say that democracy, national sovereignty, and global economy isn't compatible with all three. Quote, states embraced globalization and national autonomy in the late 19th century, but sacrificed democratic decision making. But taking back democracy and national freedom goes against connected economies around World War II. Connected nations and cooperation are good, but not when coupled with balancing out outsourcing, delicate supply lines, and the neglected working class. At both extreme ends could lead to incentives of development prioritized outside the country, as we have seen, or total isolationist thinking. The anti global attitude in America sparked from Trump's America First rhetoric in 2017. Unfortunately, just like Trump played his voters with not doing paternal maternal leave, or riling up the pro anti abortion bases by saying he will veto any abortion bill. Trump has absolutely been responsible for outsourcing 200,000 jobs as opposed to Democrats under Biden building 800,000 jobs, despite right wing leaning policies under Democrats. So, obviously, this is where it gets into part two of the right's Great Reset. So, parallel economic disturbances have interconnected in similar timelines. Both the U.S. in 2020, or sorry, both the U.S. in 2008 and Argentina in the 90s to 2002 have gone through recession from market abuse in their societies, putting their citizens into civil unrest and mass disenfranchisement to vote for a strongman. And both the U.S. and Argentina solidified their strongmen in 2020, Trump in 2024, and the new libertarian president of Argentina, uh, Javier Milei, in 2023. Of course, broadly, this is beyond both of them, more about what it says about the future. But recently, after being elected in the last years, Malay introduced cuts to spending and doing deregulation, such as oil and electricity, doing what is known as shock doctrine to stress the economy to flourish, in a sense, to reset. On December 4th, 2024, a right wing summit was held, hosted by President Javier Milei. Top figures like President uh, Bolsonaro, Steve Bannon, and Trump's family, such as Laura Trump, married to Eric Trump, showed up at the Galleria. One economist at the event states, quote, "The West is in danger. We must not let socialism advance. We must oppose regulation, shed the idea of market failure, and stop the advancement of the murderous abortion agenda. Potentially a backlash," or end quote. Potentially, this is a backlash to the globalism's attack in the third world via anti-natalist policies being scapegoated onto modern feminism, creating far right anger and paranoia about wokeness, abortion, climate issues, queer youth, and putting divorce laws into question. In conclusion, as COVID 19, the Great Reset urgently presses that trust, cooperation, moderation of consumption in the planet activism policy needs to match up with everyone's needs to work together. Clearly, that's not happening. So the Great Reset is whoever takes a stand the most, guiding the economy and algorithm to future youth activism, hope, respect for the working class, and proper care for the children and elderly, versus elite takeover of the means of revolution. It's clear the wound exposed by COVID is closing fast. As mentioned in the Great Reset, war was always preferable over population decline and pandemics that strip capital to rebuild because low skilled workers keep the economic blood flowing. And the book points out they are the means of production that fuels the elite automation's financial cycle. Cold code stolen by IBM and AI models, only to toss the human sources aside. War brews in the background, alarmist speculation of World War III no longer up for interpretation. The far right in America since January 7th, Hamas attack on Israel, are pulling no punches about letting Israel starve the Gazan population that's experiencing a youth bulge. Gaza was a little over 40% children during the genocide. While the left fight for Ukraine against Russia, this enthusiasm fueling a reset on their aging population as they send their seniors to fight against Russia, in a way blackmailing women to breed for the nation. Unfortunately, the pension reform grinding the elderly into working dust isn't just a modern strategy, it's ideology connected to usefulness to the state held by Nazi regime. In October 2024, North Korea and Russia joined military alliances to overtake Ukraine, along with China and Iran. Data analysis and CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, came to the conclusion and warned of an evil axis and that World War III has already begun. You already have battles, quote, you already have battles in the ground being coordinated in multiple countries, end quote. Trump years ago spoke like Mussolini, saying, "Drain the swamp of our political system," only to fill his cabinet with game and talk show hosts. From Dr. Oz to Linda McMahon, wife of Vince McMahon of WWE, as Department of Education. Uh, and rivals on the campaign trail like Robert F. Kennedy, who is incredibly anti-vax. Um, Trump's regime cabinet in the short term to reset the country is actually happening to close the gap left by COVID. Time for speculation. There is national security rhetoric that's similar to both the birth earth and the Great Reset, that war is preferable over population decline in terms of patriotism for war, and preferable over pandemics in terms of war creating capital and the need for realtors for infrastructure. But now it all adds up. Ben Wattenberg once said war, famine, pandemics aren't comparable to the self inflicted wound of free countries choosing to be childless, stalling the economy with climate change, life expectancy decline, aging, birth decline, outsourcing, and now a virus. It's a demographer's worst nightmare when population decline bottleneck is automated or turned to war as the best case scenario for demographic destiny. All right. I hope that was all right. I'll see you in the next one.